Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Just Two Dads with my co-host and partner, Shawn Francis. I am Brian Altunian, and today we're talking about all of the things that are going on in our society today and how it impacts money and special needs families. And no guests today, but it's going to be a lively discussion nonetheless here today on Just Two Dads. Everybody, I am Brian Altunian along with Shawn Francis. Another episode of Just Two Dads. If you're catching us live on Facebook, hello, welcome. Please put your comments in the comment section and we may post them up on the screen. We may be able to respond to them. Hopefully what we talk about today will engage you in lively discussion. For those of you that are catching us on our YouTube channel, Just Two Dads, please put comments there, subscribe to our channel, share with your friends. Put your comments there. We do respond to that as well. We are in the process of building the Just Two Dads website, by the way. So we are going to have a resource for all of our episodes and also a list of all of the folks that we've had as guests and the amazing their stories and their organizations and how you can reach out to those folks too. So be looking for that. If you're hearing us on podcast outlets, hello, welcome. Thank you for joining us. And to our family down at WSTX AM radio down in the U.S. Virgin Islands and on the Roku channel, Empowered Media. Hello, everybody, and welcome. Every week, Shawn and I do our podcast, and we discuss a whole variety of topics as they impact our special needs community. We started this a little over, we started the conversation 6 years ago, but we really started to engage in this conversation of Just Two Dads about 2 years ago. This is episode number 91 for us. So you'd think that we'd have it down. By the way, we don't, this is nothing, it's not pretty. We don't produce, we go straight at it because life comes at you straight on. So you get what you get. Anyways, I'm excited to be doing this show, this podcast with Shawn. I know who he is, where his heart is at. We come from very different backgrounds. We have different perspectives on many things, and yet our lives are so intertwined, and we have so many overlapping thoughts. A lot of times we can finish each other's sentences. So I am proud to be doing this work and on this crusade and on this mission with Shawn Francis. And for all of you who are participating and share with us, thank you. Welcome. Also, Sean Hall in Hawaii, who keeps us on track and keeps us, well, let's just put it that way, keeps us on track. Thank you, Sean Hall. Shawn Francis, how are you today, my friend?
I am doing well, blessed, thankful, and reflective, which is why we have the subject that we have today. So as those of you that follow us and listen and know that Brian and I work primarily, our primary work is in the area of financial services. And because the way that we work in our firm is different from the way that the industry generally works, we're able to, in a way, unlike anybody else, focus a portion of our business on building a bridge between the special needs community, because we're both fathers to children with special needs, and financial education, literacy, and opportunity. And so we've talked about financial literacy before. We've talked about why it's important to the special needs community. But what we're going to do today is hopefully have a little bit of a different conversation, a little bit of a different tone, kind of up the reel. Talk about some of the things that concern us, some of the things that, fears that we may have, and some of the things that we know now but wish we knew years ago, and some of the things that in particular I've learned this past week sitting with clients, which leads to some of those concerns. And a lot of it starts with just even the meaning and the value of money. And so I'm gonna run a couple things by Brian, get his take, and then offer what is hopefully more than 2 cents worth of my own view and opinion. And so,
because in terms of inflation, how much is 2 cents worth now? I'm not sure. From a buying power perspective, not much, right?
No,
but
not much.
Yeah,
not
it should be 4.7 cents worth.
Yes. Yeah. And so let's start with the obvious, which is, why is money important? And then let me back up. The other thing we're going to be talking about is an event that we have coming up on the 18th with a fantastic group that we've partnered with and worked with them in the past, an organization called We Are Brave Together, which is a support group founded by a young lady by the name of Jessica Pate, who has been a guest on our show before. She's a friend of the show. She is an amazing individual. And they're a support group for those that are caregivers or parents to those with special needs or disabilities. But let's start with with one of the most obvious questions. And to most of us, it'll have the most obvious answers. But there are answers that are not as obvious as they may seem, and hopefully equally great in value, which is, Brian, why is money important? Obviously everybody's like, well, you need it to live. We don't live in a free society where you get room and board, clothes on your back, and food on your table without money. You need it. But beyond that, why is money itself important from your perspective?
Well, I mean, I think the basic comment that you made is really it is the answer. Here's the thing. I think most people think of money as something elusive, something that they chase after, they try to capture, hold on to, and it can be fleeting. If you're wealthy, you look at money differently, right? Money is a means of leverage. Money is basically a tool, and in their perspective, flow means money comes in and money goes out. But how you utilize that money is different for wealthy folks than it is for everybody else. So yes, it's important for you to function, for you to do the things that you want to do. But again, if you live from the perspective that money is scarce, if you live from a scarcity mindset, then money is always elusive. If you live in an abundance mindset, then money is always around, and it's just how we utilize that money. If you can be used by money, or money can use you, right? That's really, at the end of the day, that's I'm leaving these are little like sound bites, right? We used to call these things sound bites. Now they're memes. We can do social media, but literally, right? Money uses you, or you use money.
Right. In other words, money is a great servant, but a horrible master.
Oh, see, you're poetic. You guys, if you've been listening to our podcast forever, you know that I just say things like straight off, but Shawn has a lyrical, poetic way of saying everything. Yes,
but it's true,
way,
because
brilliant.
it's because when it serves you, it's so great. It's in partnership. You control it, and it does as you wish. But when it is your master, it's like Ebenezer Scrooge coming around to get his rent, which he's raised 5 times, and it can drive you crazy and run you out the door. And if you add to that the special needs component, depending on the severity of your loved one's diagnosis, you're like, wait a minute, thinking about the future. I'm trying to get through the end of the day, and But anyway, I'm sorry I cut you off.
No. I mean, I think from that perspective, I think it's critical, because, again, depends on where your focus is, right? If your focus is, I need to go buy this, I need to go do this, I need to go, have this, then you're looking for the money as the resource to acquire those things. If your perspective is, money is a tool, money can be multiplied, money can build and grow and give me a lifestyle that I'm looking to have, and less driven by materialistic pursuits. It's a different perspective. So it's a matter of perspective. When we have special needs issues, our concerns are, medical costs, transportation costs, education costs, a lot of living expenses, accommodations that have to be made. And so a lot of times we'll look at a system that's supposed to support us and then think, does the system work or does the system not work? By the way, we can have this conversation too, because I have a very specific perspective on the utilization of a system, and our perspective in the U.S. about that. But I think that when you have a special needs child and you're thinking about those other things, money can be elusive. You can be feeling like you're in a world of scarcity, because a lot of times time is scarce, and attention is scarce, energy can be scarce, and money can be scarce as well. So So I think the first thing that families with special needs, family members should think about is, it really is a mindset. It's a mindset around abundance first. It should, I hate to use that word, should be around abundance. You can train yourself to think about things in terms of abundance as opposed to scarcity, and money falls into that category as well. So that's my sort of general opinion about money, if you want to expound on that a little bit.
Okay. No, I think it's either way we're good, but I think it's it's 100% accurate. How do you think about it? And you can't ever judge, and you just want to learn too, because I've been a financial services professional now for 15 years. We've seen all kind of things, and no matter how long I'm doing that, and no matter how high I like to keep my consciousness, I always learn something new that comes from it. There's always something that's revealed. And the more you learn, the easier it is, or should be, to give others grace. And so if somebody hasn't even stepped foot into that arena, then how would they possibly know? So with that said, I would ask you, and maybe I'll go first a little, which is like, if you think about what you know now and what you've learned as a financial professional that you wish you knew years ago as a parent to a child with special needs, what would you say would be the answer to that for you?
Well, let me just say this. In my upbringing, my folks were very successful entrepreneurs. The crazy thing is that they were obvious in their they were not extravagant, but they spent money, and they did a lot of things that was obvious that they were fairly well to do. But when it came to discussions around the table, the perspective was always like, we're not rich. What are you talking about? I remember asking, this is the old days of having landlines. I was a teenager in school, and when I would get a phone call, like, we had one extension in the hall, right, and then one extension downstairs, and depending on who got there first, pick up the phone, and my dad would be on the other end, and my friend would call, "Hey, is Brian there?" And he'd be like, "Yeah, hey man, I need the phone, so keep this short, all right?" And then he would right, and I had to race to the hall to get the phone. And I had said to them, "Can I get a phone in my room, so I can talk to my friends and not have to run downstairs or run down the hall?" And I was like, "No, that's what you're not a rich kid, no." And I was like, "That's a weird perspective." By the way, coming from my guy who drove a Rolls Royce, who owned his own business. I'm like, I remember him telling my girlfriend at the time. He looked at her and he said, "It's so weird. People treat me like they act like I'm money bags, like I've got money coming out of my ears." And she's like, "Yeah, drive a Rolls Royce, dude. Like, what do you expect?" So it was kind of I grew up in this sort of skewed perspective of money, and what it was. I worked for my dad, and he paid me as a W-2 employee, and he paid me half of what he said he was going to pay me. He said, "Don't worry, I'm putting cash in your safety deposit box." I'm like, okay, but I'm not touching it. That's not that's a weird thing, right? I've come to learn later that there were reasons why he was doing that. But anyways, it doesn't matter. But the bottom line is, I didn't have a really good perspective of money, because we didn't want for anything. But we didn't live lavishly, and we were always told, it's fleeting and it can go away anytime. So, and my parents were children of the Depression. So their parents grew up in depression with no money. So my folks were in a hoarding, perspective. They hoarded it and acted like they didn't have it. So people wouldn't ask for it. Money, my dad used money as a manipulative tool, actually. And so I grew up having not a great relationship with money personally, because I felt I was manipulated, but I saw manipulation around money, and I thought, it just wasn't I just wasn't very, anyways, wasn't a very positive experience for me.
So it
So
didn't motivate you.
it didn't really motivate. Yeah, it didn't really motivate me. And yeah, I didn't really have a very clear perspective of what it did and what it was good for, honestly.
Wow. So then how did that come into play when your daughter Jordan's born and you become, her diagnosis takes place, you have a certain amount of accomplishments under your belt at that point in time. But nonetheless, how did it affect it? Number one. And then two, then with what you've learned in our work together in financial services over the past, 8 years for you, eight or 6 or 7 years, 7
years. Yeah.
Wow. It goes by
Years.
fast.
Yeah.
What have you learned in those 7 years that you wish you knew when her diagnosis took place? Because for you in particular, you had a certain amount of accomplishments under your belt at that point, as far as, monetary success and things like that go. But there's still obviously some kind of effect. What would you say?
Well, and just so you know, I really didn't. I stopped working for my parents in the late 80s, 87, and I had ventured out on my own as a consultant, and I was working for a few companies. Jordan was born in 95, so I had not achieved the monetary success. Now, her mom, my first wife, Risa, was an attorney. And so she grew up in a profession that she at the time hated. And again, there was a bit of a manipulation component there as well, because I was an entrepreneur. And so what happened when Jordan was diagnosed is I had time freedom. And that was advantageous to me. Time freedom to be able to do things with Jordan and take her places. But I personally did not have financial success at that point, but my wife did. And
you had flexibility though.
I had flexibility. And so what I saw was that money could provide other benefits, right? That's what I did learn with
I hope
Jordan.
everybody catches that too, because when we talk about money and time, we often talk about, sorry, not to cut you off, Brian.
That's okay.
We often talk about, money and financial freedom and building a dream and all this kind of stuff, which is like end of the rainbow type stuff, right?
Yeah.
But what would it mean if to anybody, but then as a special needs parent, if you're listening, what would it mean if on the way to freedom, no matter how long it takes to do that, and that each person's definition is different. I take it to mean that you've got complete control of your time, and whether you work or not, you're making enough money that surpasses your living expenses. And then hopefully, if it's done right, you're obviously growing money someplace where it outpaces inflation, and then you can avoid as much taxation as possible too. That's freedom. That's my definition of freedom. I think most people would agree with that, enough people. But what if on the way to freedom, you then have flexibility, which Brian is talking about in terms of Jordan's therapies and things of that sort? Because, that was one of the first things that attracted me from an entrepreneurial standpoint is flexibility. Because my wife and I were talking about that the other day when Elijah's diagnosis first came along, because you talk about running all over the place, man.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I remember I worked for my dad. So I was an employee. I worked for my mom. My mom was in commercial real estate. So I did that a little bit and got a little flavor of the owning your own business, eat what you kill perspective. And I trying to find a little bit of a happy medium. I left and went to work in the entertainment industry as an employee, and kind of worked my way up. To your point, I was not really not really money driven. I was more looking at climbing the ladder. I had studied for my MBA while I was working. So I got my MBA to give me a certain level of, achievement, a certain level of success. But I was working for somebody else. When I left that working for somebody else and started to do consulting and go back on my own, again, that's where the time flexibility came in. That's where the time freedom. And I was trying to find something that made sense, to your point, that could enable me to make enough money, give me the time freedom, cover my bills, put some money away, start to build, something significant. When Jordan was diagnosed, simultaneously to that diagnosis, my father-in-law contracted, I don't know if contracted is even the word, but he ended up with, getting Parkinson's disease and deteriorated rapidly. So we were kind of having special needs on both ends. And it was a challenge. I was driving both to appointments and stuff,
Wow.
which was great for me. But thankfully I had it. The challenge I had is that my wife at the time hated being a lawyer. And so she was the financial foundation at the time. And so, and she sort of resented being in that position. So between Jordan's diagnosis, my father-in-law's deterioration, for 4 or 5 years until he passed, and my wife's own resentment about being stuck in a career that she didn't really care for, that put a lot of challenge on our marriage. And so we ended up divorcing. And I was an entrepreneur, and I was remarrying. I'm sorry, I was dating a little bit at the time. I ended up remarrying somebody, but that's when the financial success happened. I was, so we were sharing custody. I was, not to get into a lot of details. I don't have to get into too deep a level of detail here. But what happened was I was looking for opportunities to have some control of my time and be able to make a good living. And I was had an opportunity to start a wireless startup company right at the beginning of the .com era. Bad timing, but it gave me a flavor for what could be possible. Being entrepreneurial, owning your own business, and doing something that was advantageous and could pay was really attractive to me. And so what I started to see was that the people who were also entrepreneurial had a lot of things in common, right? A lot of drive, a lot of freedom, a lot of flexibility, worked really hard. I learned a really good work ethic working for my dad. But what I did learn was that I needed to make a good living. That was the first company, which we didn't do very well because it was a .com era. But the second company that I started had an opportunity to join, started as CEO, and took that company public. And I took a number of companies public. Now, Jordan at the time was about 8, and we were putting her in different schools. Because I had time flexibility, we could explore the educational options for her that would give her a chance to win. So that's where, money was good, that, money was used as a tool, and it gave me the time freedom and flexibility. And so the one thing that I've learned, and I think I posted something about this week, some of the things that wealthy folks have in common is they have, first of all, multiple streams of revenue. Multiple streams of revenue is a key, and owning your own business is a key. Now, I know that that's difficult, especially if you've worked as an employee for a long time. But I will tell you this, that is the magical component. By the way, you don't always succeed. You hear success stories that was preceded by a ton of failure.
Right.
But I was lucky the first few that I was involved in that I had some success and took some companies out to the public market. We did very well and made a lot of money. And it gave me, again, financial freedom to do the things that I want. When I remarried, my son, his mom didn't work for 8 years, his first 8 years of his life, because she didn't have to, because we had the financial, capability of only having to have the one, the one income, but it enabled us to also work with Jordan and support her special needs issues. So I guess a really long story there. I apologize for going on and on and on, but really I've learned a lot that again, some of the keys to wealth is accumulation, multiple streams of revenue, and flexibility, freedom is all possible. If you live in a state of a concept of abundance, it's all possible. Again, it doesn't mean that money is rushing in the door all the time. You just know that it's possible. It's coming. It's coming. Does that make sense?
Right, definitely.
Kind of go on that a little bit.
No, it makes complete sense. And I think there's something to be said for thinking about the flexibility. When I mention flexibility and then freedom, most people just think about the freedom and it's freedom or bust. And we could have a whole nother conversation about that. But I think what people do is that becomes their reason for, maybe not doing anything and not making a change because you're like, you know what, you're talking about not being able to ever, have to work again. I don't, I don't even know about that. So then nothing is done. But for the person that says, man, an extra $5,000 a month, that would mean something. If I made only a penny more per month, but I then had the flexibility to be with my kids whenever I need, or that would, nobody thinks about the bite size sort of piece. But then again, by the same token, in terms of the way we think and the way our brains operate, it's also why gratitude can also, it's important, but it can also become an excuse for inactivity as well, because people are like, wait a minute, want more. For some people, if they have a roof over their head, food on the table, clothes on the back, there's not a reason to necessarily want more. And then there's almost this shame that comes with the idea of aspiring to have more. You can be grateful and still be dissatisfied. Those things go hand in hand. At least they can. They won't if your mind, they won't if your mindset prevents you from doing so. And then what happens is then, as special needs parents, we're warriors and skeptics all rolled into one. And it takes a tremendous amount of focus, especially for those of us that are not part of a team where you have a strong relationship and or marriage where you're working together to get from point A to point B. When it's just you, that's a whole different story. And you want to make sure you tune into our show next week when our guest is a guy that's a single dad that has more than one child on the spectrum. So, but those things
amazing.
can be done. Yeah, those things can be done. So moving on, let me ask you this. Why do you think, in your opinion, that money is a difficult thing to talk about? Because when I got into our business, I got into financial services, when I learned the way that it can be done in terms of sitting with someone, not charging a fee for the service, having, a big chunk of the industry to offer to a client as opposed to just one company, and being able to represent the client versus the industry, making sure that you don't do business on a first appointment, all these different things and all these options. I thought if this is important for families and neurotypical members, it's twice as important for families that have members with special needs. But I had to work my nerve up to being able to talk to people about that. And I came to realize over time that while people are uncomfortable talking about those things, it was just as much, if not more, my thing. I had to get over that. And so It can be tough. I'll give my perspective in a minute, but generally speaking, why do you think money is then difficult for people to talk about? And then secondly, why is it important for those of us who are caregivers or parents to those with special needs to talk about?
Well, I mean, we can talk about philosophically. There's a whole bunch of reasons why it's difficult. They're two different things. So the question you just asked, they're two, in my opinion, they're two completely different things. Mm-hmm. There is historically been elements of our society globally, by the way, that where the discussion of money, more importantly, where the discussion of wealth is not something that is shared openly. Going back to the days of Aristotle and Socrates, it was landowners and everybody else. The landowners were a very select few people. And when the concept of democracy came about, everyone's like, yes, I'm all for democracy, except that my land is my land and you work for me, right? Animal Farm, if you guys remember, Animal Farm was sort of a conversation about communism, and it's a classic novel talking about let's recreate our own society and build equality across the board. And it works for a very short period of time, and then it doesn't. And then there's always somebody whose general interests they put above everybody else. So I think that there's historically some systemic elements that have built into our psyche that what you just said, right? People use the adage, money is the root of all evil, right? And they think that that's what the adage is, right? And only recently have we heard the correction of that, right? So, but just so you know, that was not by accident. The concept money is the root of all evil was purposefully put into the mindsets of the average worker, the person who worked in the field, the person who worked the menial jobs. The real statement was the love of money is the root of all evil, right? Which is like, you love money so much to the point where it becomes dangerous. Anyways, but that's
Yeah.
not what was put in the system. What was
Right.
put out in the system was money is the root of all evil. Having money means shame, right? Talking about money means shame. How many times you hear people like knocking down somebody who is successful? Oh, must be nice. I have a friend from Boston, and they joke about there's an area of Boston called I don't even know what they call it. It's where the townies are from, right? Where they say everything about them's like, oh, must be nice. Oh, you're going on vacation? Must be nice. Must be nice, right? As if it's a bad thing to succeed. And so when you're surrounded by folks who make it seem like it's a bad thing to succeed, you don't want to talk about succeeding. You don't want to talk about achievement, because you lose the social connection in our country. That's why I'm going to go off a little bit on a tangent.
That's okay.
We can talk about the special needs component in just a second, but I had posted this earlier this week. That the wealthy in this country is we call them the 1%ers, the wealthy 1%ers, right? The wealthy 1% control 82% of the wealth in the United States. 1%. So there are just under 330 million people in the United States. That means 3.3 million people control 82% of the wealth in the United States. So the interests of those who have money are being catered to over the interests of everybody else. Because in general, even if it was 2%, you're still talking only 6.6 million people out of 330. Right. So how do you protect the land, if you will, the land ownership of the 6.6 million in a country of 330 million, right? I think socially, the majority of the country in the United States kind of lean into a more social environment, because clearly we're not part of the top 2%, right? And so when there are things like what's happened this week with, a school shooting at, Robb Elementary School, one of a string of mass shootings that have hit to the heart of so many people, and why can't we have reasonable gun control laws? Well, because there's a reason for that, right? And how do you protect the interests of the wealthy is if you can turn the non-wealthy, let's just call everybody else the non-wealthy. If you can create divide among and between the non-wealthy, then you have built in a system that's just going to eat its tail. It's going to run around in circles, just going to eat its tail. And so
cannibalize itself.
Right. So you create racial divide, you create social injustices, everything becomes us versus them, because then if there's enough divisiveness down in the 98% to protect the 2% are protected. The interests of the 2% are protected. And again, not getting political, but the conservative base in this country knows that if they were going to go up to a vote, interests of 6.6 million versus everybody else, chances are they're probably going to lose elections. So if they can support the certain issues that keep a big chunk of that 320 million involved and engaged and can loop them together, the challenge that the Republican Party has in the United States is they have two constituencies. They've got the wealthy 6.6, and then they've got this other group of folks. If they can turn those folks into, critical race theory conspiracists, anti-BLM, gun protection of the Second Amendment and gun control. If they can get those folks all rallied behind their mission, then the interests of the 2% are protected. And so we have a cultural mix in this country. We have people from all over the world in this country. We talk about the difference between races. Honestly, the only difference in this country is between two groups, the wealthy and everybody else. And in fact, you can create systems that keep the everybody else saying, it's not me, it's the system's working against me, right? The system's working against me. The system failed me. I need help. And if the government can say, hey, listen, man, we got to go tax the wealthy because that will take care of everybody else. The everybody else is like, yeah, man, I'm all for it. Tax the wealthy. They've got the money. Tax the wealthy so that we can take care of. And the wealthy are like, wait a minute. This is not really about rich and poor. It's about federal government
People.
overreach versus state, overreach. It's a whole system that, again, to your point, cannibalizes itself. So the challenge that we have today in our country, and by the way, this is happening around the world. It's not just in the United States. It's happening in other places of democracy. As we're building global, and I'm sorry, Shawn, I'll stop here in a sec, but
That's
as we're
okay.
creating a global environment of communication and information, what's happening is, as people are seeing the impact that that we're having on this, that again, as we want to create some sort of egalitarian aspect of what we're doing, there's a lot of divide that's been created on purpose to kind of keep everybody, busy fighting themselves and keep the interests of the wealthy protected. So the answer, in my opinion, to all of this is learn what the hell the wealthy are doing. What are they doing? How do they think about money? How do they use money? How has money become a thing that is easily available and readily accessible to wealthy, but not to everybody else? How can we learn that? And really, it's a matter of education. So to your point, when you're in a financial services, position as we are, our education is, let's educate folks on the things that the wealthy people do, so we can complain about the 1% to 2% or join the 1% to 2%, right? Because the reality is there are things in our society that are made easier when you have money. That bankers give loans to people who have money as opposed to people who don't have money. They don't, right? That's the way of things. So how do you put yourself in a position? Financial education, multiple streams of revenue, all of that stuff, right? That really is the key to having success in this country and this life. Because to your point, what you were saying, money begets freedom, flexibility, time, energy. All those things that we think are scarce are in full abundance. And if you don't believe that it's full abundance, in the last 2 years, our printing presses just printed trillions of dollars like it was nothing. Like it was nothing.
Yeah.
They just printed more.
Yeah.
By the way, they will continue to print more. Money is always around. If it's not enough, they'll just print more. That's the reality.
Yeah. And then there's something to be said for, and I don't know what the numbers are off the top of my head, but you can expound on it, is that the top 2% have, in the middle of
trillions, $4.1 trillion during the pandemic. I'm sorry, is what you're going to say, right? In the middle of the pandemic, their savings went up $4.1 trillion. The top 2%.
And here's the thing, now there's many of you are listening. Well, that's not me. That's just not us. That's not who we are. Yeah, but there's still steps, tools, concepts, and ideas that get you access to some of that, and they shouldn't have it all. And the only thing that's keeping us from it is lack of information and the way that we've thought. And if we do what we've done, we get what we've always gotten. In order to get something new, you got to not only do something new, but you have to also think new. That doesn't necessarily mean just what you think, but how you think. And how you think is just as, if not more important than what you think. And, it's funny. I mean, there's more to money than money. That's really what it comes down to. There's more to money than money. Look, my oldest, the oldest of our boys, he's he's in law enforcement, and he turned me on to a television show called Bosch. Right? It's an Amazon original, and it's now on IMDb, which is now free view or something like that. Anyway, this isn't a pitch for Bosch, but in the episode that we were looking at yesterday, and I look at TV sporadically, especially if I get an opportunity to look at stuff with my kids. And so we're looking, and there's this billionaire that is on his deathbed, and he's hired Bosch to find if he has any heirs. And the heir is one that would bring maybe shame to some of his constituents or whatever have you. And if the heir is not found, all of his proceeds go to his board. And they don't want it to go to the heir. They're prepared to kill, right? And when they find the heir, who is a granddaughter, her first thought is, when Bosch explains to her what she's about to come into and everything. And she's someone, and this is so real, it's a TV show, but I could see it in real life. She's an artist. She's free-spirited. She's not motivated by money. She could care less about anything, financial level or whatever, but you get the clear impression that she's the type of person that would want to change the world. So she's like, oh, when she finds out who it is, she's like, well, how much is it? And he's like, billions. She's like, stops and thinks about it. She's like, why would I want that anyway? Why would I want his money? Why would I? He's like, do you know how much good you could do with that? Yeah. And she stopped and thought about it. And she's like, all right, F it, let's do it. So that she can prove through DNA that she's a relative. And I could see so many people in a situation like that do one of two things. Be like, oh yeah, take it and blow it all. Or just resist it altogether because it's got such a taboo and bad connotation. My next question, I think you already answered, which was something that came to me earlier from a post that I saw, which is, have you ever noticed that there is no politician that I've ever seen, whether it's one that's aspiring to gain a seat in office or one who's made a career of it? I've never heard any of them, as part of their pitch, claim to provide financial education or literacy in our schools or to the general public. Never, ever, ever. And I think you've already explained why. Because there's profit in ignorance, there's profit in division, and there is profit in control.
The thing that people have to understand is that when folks run for office, and I would say this in any country, it's not just restricted to the United States, is it is there's a gain of personal interest. People may start out with the altruistic perspective of I want to help people, and I think that there are people that truly do want to help people. But I think that the financial gain, the personal gain, is almost too. And again, this is because we have a messed up perspective of money in our society and wealth. We have equal, wealth with power, right? And so I think that people. I have a friend who is from China who had a relative in politics, and he was very clear. He said, the difference between China and the United States is in China, when you're elected to political office, it's just out there that you are doing it and you're going to make, millions and millions and millions of dollars. It's just everybody just talks about it. And in fact, when you're removed from government at some point, the government actually comes in and takes it away from you in China. Here, we pretend like I'm doing this for the altruistic purposes. I'm doing this for the good of the people, not for me. It's not for my benefit, Yeah. But when you see folks who have been in office for a very long time on both sides of the political aisle, and you look at their net worth after serving versus prior to serving, it's astronomical how much their net worth has expanded. So wealthy, this is why there's certain changes to the financial industry that are never going to happen, because the politicians' interests are impacted. They're part of the wealthy 1% as well. They've put themselves in the position to gain. That's why we have this issue like, you can't trade stocks before some law comes out because, that's inside information, right? But so many politicians have profited by policy and their personal investments, when they're voting on policy. It's outrageous. And again, I will say there are a few that you can point to on both sides of the aisle that are really, truly doing something for the betterment of their constituents. Unfortunately, it's a very small number. It's a very small number.
Definitely. I want to spend the last 15 minutes talking about, we'll when we get to the last bit, we'll wrap up and talk about the event that we have coming up on the 18th. Yeah. But I want to talk about some of the concepts that will be shared in that event. And one of the first things I want to talk about, so we're talking about, specifically money and special needs at this point, like almost exclusively side by side. And as conscious as I try to be, again, and the experience that I had an appointment this week with some clients that are just the sweetest people. And this was for an estate planning appointment, and they brought up some questions and things that I had not even thought of before, and made me review my family's own situation as it relates to an estate plan. So obviously, Brian nor I are attorneys, but we work with one of the largest estate planning firms in the country. for that portion of the business that we do, that area, estate planning, special needs trust, conservatorship, and things of that sort. We handle the other areas in terms of investments, retiring, life insurance, and things of that sort. But in this particular appointment, the clients not only had there was specificity with regard to the things they wanted, and then the questions that they had. And it just hit me that I've never stopped to think about when you put, a plan in place, will, trust, special needs trust, you can make that as specific as you want to. And it made me stop and think as to exactly what that means. It's your voice when you're no longer here. I get, and I've always understood, and I will say that if you don't have a plan for your money, guess who does? The government. And it's not based on how much you have. If you have pennies, fractions of pennies, or billions upon millions, they have a plan for whatever money you don't have a plan for. But some of the questions that this couple, were asking, they were like, well, you know what? And they were having a conversation amongst themselves. There's something that's very beautiful about building some trust with people. So they were very open in the conversation they were having. And they were like, do we want to make sure that our children or our child that is neurotypical does not spend money on weapons or arms? Do we want to make sure that doesn't take place? But wait a minute, do we want to prevent them from doing that? Might they live in a society where that's needed at that point? And my point isn't how you feel about the right to bear arms. My point is that however you feel about that or anything else is what you would stipulate and put in to the will. And in their case, a will with a special needs component. And, it's not just the plans for the money, but anything that you would wish to take place. None of that gets taken into consideration or is not heard if you don't have the plan in place with the level of specificity that you desire. And so going back to our conversation earlier in terms of what's difficult to think about and talk about, the whole thing is difficult. When you talk about having money to leave for someone when you're not here, that's not an easy thing to talk about. But as difficult as that is to talk about, it is as equally peaceful and joyous in terms of the time that you have here once those things are said and done. So I would implore our listeners to stop and think about what it is that you want. What do you want to have in place? And then maybe there's a charity that you want to be able to leave something to. And if you don't have great means, then that's where the life insurance piece comes in as well. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I don't wholeheartedly agree with that position, because the reality is, if you're having open dialogue with your children, your family, as you're growing up about money and dreams and goals, then having the conversation about, oh, by the way, when I pass away and I'm not here, this is what I've laid out. The challenge that I had is it's crazy. I remember thinking about this. I was in MBA school at the time. I don't know what it was. And I remember saying to my dad, hey, by the way, if something happens to you, where's your will? Where's the trust? Where's all that paperwork? And his perspective was, don't worry about it. I'm like, well, what do you mean? Don't worry about it. What do I mean?
Yeah.
He's like, you can worry about that when you become my caretaker. And I thought, the crazy thing about that is again, if you're at a point of incapacity and
if I'm your caretaker, I don't know if he's literally telling him, sorry to cut you off. He's literally telling you, you can and will worry about it. Not in a euphemistic way in terms of, you can worry about it, meaning we can cross that bridge when we get to it. He said, no, when we get to that bridge, it will be blown up like the bridge over the River Kwai, just completely destroyed, and you won't be able to figure out how to get to the other side. So you will worry about it then. That's what I'm telling you.
Right, exactly right. And here's the thing for people to understand. This is why having a conversation around money is important. If you have a loved one who is ill and you're not on their bank account, signature line and part of the bank account, you will not get access to that account. So if you have a parent that is ailing and they have money in their account, checking account, savings account, whatever, If you're not on that account, you cannot get access to that money. That's one of those things where you're like, you need to have an open dialogue about the conversation. Because first of all, hey, by the way, new news for people, everybody dies. Your loved ones are going to die. It's not an if, it's when.
And so will you.
And you will die. You're going to die at some point. So you can bury your head in the sand and not have the conversation, or say some BS thing to your kid. You'll find out when the time is right. It's a little bit like it puts your heirs, it puts your loved ones in a bad position to not be discussing money. So to your point, Shawn, it's not a difficult conversation if the conversations have occurred. If everybody's on the same page, I want my son to be a successful business person. I don't care what he does. I don't care what he chooses to do. My kid's 14 years old, by the way. He has flipped sneakers. He's now flipping baseball cards again. Like, he'll do whatever. He's like, hey, Dad, I figured out a way to make money. Cool. Entrepreneurial mindset. That's a kid that's going to run. I set up my business so I can leave my business behind to my kids. I do our financial conversations with my kids in the background so they can hear me have the conversation. So if it's a choice that they want to have to take over my business, they can. Right? They can do that. So they're thinking about money. We talk about money, the difficulties at times, and how we create solutions to overcome whatever difficulties money presents. So it's only a difficult conversation if, and by the way, this covers a majority of the folks in our country, if you're not talking about money to your family ongoingly. Struggles, benefits, the power, what it brings you, how to use it as a tool, how to learn about it together. If you can have those conversations with your family, then it's an easier conversation to have. If you're a family of a special needs child, if they have neurotypical siblings, having these conversations openly puts the sibling in place to make sure that child is taken care of with a special needs trust. You can explain to your children, I've put a trust in place, a special needs trust for your sibling, so that they will be taken care of. All of those things. We had a guest last week who talked about, she had twins. One was on the spectrum. The other was neurotypical. And the neurotypical sister said, I will always take care of her if something happens to you, Mom.
And she's the reason that she thinks that way, because she has open dialogue about not just money, but everything else with her.
Everything. Yeah. And so that's really why we're trying to do. Get people educated, get people to talk about it internally, so that it's not a difficult conversation. It's something that's shared. So I know we're getting close on our time. I can't believe it. To me, also,
no, that's okay. It goes by so fast. But the first thing I think that not just the nation, but the world would be so much of a better place if people would talk about what the fears are. And I think that for some people, it's difficult to talk about what their fears are, whether you're talking about money or anything else, because there's such, especially for us as men, the first instinct is to put on the mask and let me, like when it comes to, I don't want to get on a tangent, but when it comes to gun control, I think most people are afraid that any change to the gun laws means that they're going to take them away altogether. So what people are doing is they're having a response to a statement that is not being made, at least not made by the majority, because most people realize that, as trying to put a water in a hose or get a genie back in the bottle is what it would mean to take away the right to bear arms. Nobody's trying to do that. But by the same token, the same thing then applies to money. If you can begin to say, look, I am not comfortable with A, B, or C because of D, E, and F, then you can have that conversation. So that's where the whole thing starts with money. Like, for instance, we talk about the life insurance piece. When you have that in place, you want to make sure that the trust is established, and then the trust ends up being the beneficiary, especially if you end up having benefits that the loved one with special needs or a disability might be collecting, and you don't want those things to be affected. And that leads me to, as we get ready to wrap up, as we mentioned at the beginning of the show, we've partnered with a fantastic organization called We Are Brave Together, and we are doing a series of financial literacy events with them. The next one is on the 18th. It is free of charge. We're going to be covering things like life insurance, what it is, what it really means, the protection of not only benefits, but the protection of income, the opportunity to do so without any risk of losing what you're putting in, the opportunity to do so and grow money at a rate that outpaces inflation, and to also minimize what, if anything, you pay in taxes on that growth. The opportunity to put money aside and plan for the future and have income for life within certain products, and then the wills and the trusts and everything else that we talked about, and then business solutions also, because we talked about being able to have that flexibility and then hopefully on a path to freedom. The link for the event is on the screen. If you're looking, joining us on Facebook Live or looking at our YouTube channel, if you're listening on WSDX or on any podcast platform, it is at wearebravetogether.org/events /the financial planning resource group. And if you go to the website of wearebravetogether.org, you'll find it there. But we are, we're looking forward to it. It's a privilege and a blessing for us to be able to do that. We're trying to change the world one person at a time.
June 18th at 2:00 p.m. Pacific time. June 18th, and you can find it on the wearebravetogether.org website. So we look forward to seeing you there and continuing this conversations. Again, it's about being in practice, and it's about being in conversation about money and finances. So,
and remember, there's more to money than money. We're only talking about the finance and the money part because that's in order to get to the other stuff, which is, fulfillment, purpose. Fulfillment and success are two different things. All these different things, money allows for all of that. Again, money is either a wonderful servant or a terrible master. And again, there's more to money than money.
Absolutely. Flexibility, freedom, choice. That's really what it comes down to at the end of the day. So as we end our show, thank you all for joining us. For those folks who've stayed on the whole time, we appreciate you. Katie and Joe, thanks for your comments. Sean Hall, thank you so much for, again, keeping us on track, reminding us of the time on a regular basis. And we love you out there, brother. Aloha. For everybody, again, I always end this show by saying, empathy and love is needed now more than ever. If you're seeing somebody's situation, have some empathy. You don't know what they're going through, what they've been through, or what their situation is in the moment. So be empathetic. And if you can look at the world through the lenses of love, then the world will be a better place. So with that, I'll throw it to you. Thank you all for joining. We love you. Thank you all.
I just want to thank everyone again for tuning in. I want to thank my wife Laura and my mom Jan, again, the women in my life without whom I would not be. And if you're listening or watching, wherever the case might be, whether you're catching us live or after the fact, we thank you. We so appreciate the time that you take to join us, and we're doing the best we can to make sure that we add value to your time. If there's topics that you want to know about, not only we not only encourage you to view on the YouTube channel, Just Two Dads, like, comment, and subscribe, but let us know if there's things that you, topics that you would like to see discussed on the show. If there's people that you think would make a good guest for the show, if somebody has a message that you think people should hear, and you can always email us at wearejust2dads@gmail.com. And we thank you. And we'll see you next time when we have a great show coming up next week. We love you.
Great guest next week. We love you. Thank you, everybody.